It sets the stage for the opening session of PLF 2023, which very aptly is a discussion on Sri Aurobindo, India, and the world. Gautam Chikermane, we invite Gautam Chikermane, Vice President of ORF and editor of the book Reading Sri Aurobindo. Dr. Sampadananda Mishra, Director, Center for Human Studies, Rishihood University. Dr. Pariksith Singh, physician, entrepreneur, writer. And Devdip Ganguli, faculty member, Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education, also editor of the book Reading Sri Aurobindo. This session will be moderated by Nandini Sengupta, journalist and author.
Namaskar. It is my honor to start the opening session of PLF 2023 with this very august panel. We have Pariksith ji, we have Gautam Chikermane, we have Sampadananda ji, and we have Devdip. And together, hopefully this session will talk about Sri Aurobindo's vision for India and the emerging India that we see today and that we hope to see in the centuries to follow. I'm going to start off with a slightly controversial cue with Sampadananda ji. Just now, Tejasvi Surya ji mentioned how the two words Sanatan Dharma have been in the news recently and have become very politically charged as well. Will you tell us about what Sri Aurobindo said about Sanatana Dharma and also bring in the kind of rousing message he gave in the Uttarpara speech, which references the importance of Sanatana Dharma in the rising of India?
So namaskar and thank you PLF for having me here. And it's a very good beginning because Tejasvi ended it with a most powerful quotation of Sri Aurobindo on Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma, and when Sri Aurobindo speaks about it, and he says that Sanatana Dharma is the only Swarajya and spirituality is the only politics of India. And what is this Dharma? In a beautiful manner, Sri Aurobindo in his book, The Renaissance in India, he says that this Dharma can be defined in various ways. Like you can cling to the etymology of the word Dharana, Dharma, and then interpret it in various ways. But the most practical way Sri Aurobindo has explained it in his book and in many places. He says the idea of this Sanatana Dharma and the idea of Dharma is rooted in the idea of the Shrestha, the idea of Arya. When we look at what was this idea of Shrestha and Arya, we understand the practical aspect of what Dharma is. What was this idea of Shrestha? So he says, a Shrestha, how does he look? Or what is his character? What is his heart? What is his mind? How does he manage his social affair? He says an Arya or a Shrestha has benevolence in his heart. And there is a long list of words in the passage of Sri Aurobindo. I am picking up only the most important one. Benevolence in the heart. And in the character, he has heroism, he has loyalty, he has truthfulness. And in his mind, he has the infallible knowledge. In his mind, he has the infallible knowledge. And in his inner being, he has the seeking for the truth. And in his social relation, he fulfills the dharma as a father, as a son, as a citizen, as a ruler, as a king, whoever he may be in the society, he clings to the truth of his own being and then fulfills the dharma. And when we are talking about dharma, again, Sri Aurobindo followed the path of the rishis. He himself was a rishi. And the rishi's ideal of dharma, and especially when we contemplate on the Vedas, Upanishads and the Gita and the various foundational texts of Sanatana Dharma, so the idea is Satyam, Ritam, Brihat. These are the three words which Sri Aurobindo has given much importance to. And these three, Satyam, Ritam, Brihat, actually three in one. You can say they cannot be separated from each other. Where Sri Aurobindo says, in his Secret of the Veda, interpreting the words of the rishis, the realizations of the rishis, that one has to be, Sanatana Dharma insists that one has to be in one's own home. This idea of Swadama, Swagriha, then only truly one is Grihastha. Grihastha is not just to lead a householder's life, but to be at home. It's something like someone said, when God visits you, He must find you at home. We're not at home. To be at home, to realize the Swadama, to realize the Satyam, Ritam, Brihat is at the center of Sanatana Dharma, and that is what Sri Aurobindo described in all that he has spoken about the Swadharma of Bharat, or what is central to the Sanatana Dharma. So this is what is my preliminary idea which I shared, and moving ahead I will be sharing more idea with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sampadananda. I'm going to toss the question now to Gautam, because the G20 summit has just concluded, and just this morning I was reading some of the stories that were written by international media. There was a story in Wall Street Journal which ended with the fact that the G20 summit showed India rising, Europe shrinking, Russia and China dithering, Russia and China seething, and US dithering. So the fact that Wall Street Journal makes this comment is very telling. I would like to ask Gautam that in Sri Aurobindo's vision, where did he see India going, and what is India's role in the future of the nation kind?
Am I audible or do I need to? So if you don't mind, I'm going to hijack that question and keep it for a little, after 30 seconds. I want to take the previous question and just give one quote and my reading on it. Sri Aurobindo also said, this Hindu nation was born with the Sanatan Dharma. With it, it moves, and with it, it grows. When the Sanatan Dharma declines, then the nation declines. And if the Sanatan Dharma were capable of perishing, as some people today want it to, with the Sanatan Dharma, it would perish. The Sanatan Dharma, that is nationalism. Small comment here, which is that in our country, 75 years after independence, we have big names abusing Sanatan Dharma openly, and there is nothing happening, neither in the street nor in the state. The entire state seems to be wrapped in cowardice. Try saying this to any other religion and you will see what happens to you. The state will either put you in jail or the street will behead you. So I think this is an important point for the Sanatanis in this room and outside to know that we are being squeezed from all sides, from the state as well as from the street. To answer your question about G20, I think this is part of a rising India. This rise in India, which you can see in economic terms, you can see in foreign policy terms, you can see it in science, technology, music, culture, books. Anywhere you look today, there is a resurgence of India which is happening in its own way. You also see it in crime. You also see it in anti-Hinduism. You also see it on the street in terms of riots, etc. So all this, when you look at it together, I see it as part of what Sri Aurobindo has said and analyzed as the rise of a Rajasic nation. We all know in this room that we are composed of three tattvas, which is tamas, rajas, and sattva. Sri Aurobindo expanded this vision of the individual to the state and said nations too have this ups and downs. India had been going through tamas, and what we are seeing today, the rise, including G20, but outside G20 as well, is the rise of this Rajasic tendencies of a nation. It's a nation that is rising with all the power, dynamism, force that it has. Nations generally rise from tamas to rajas. According to Sri Aurobindo, there has been no nation till date that has transcended into becoming a sattvic nation. So this is a cycle of tamas and rajas. Today, how I see, we see India is moving towards in the Rajasic space. So every kind of dynamism that is happening can be attributed at a collective level, at a national level, to this the Rajasic force that you may also be sensing inside you, around you. And if you don't sense it, I would only say get out of the way. Because this force is here, this force is coming. In G20, this force has expressed itself in several ways. The success of the event notwithstanding, I think more than all that, what G20 is telling the world in very simple words, and I think somebody said it before here as well, India is now becoming a global player. Not because of its economy. We are still just the fifth largest. We're going to be the fourth largest within this decade, before 2030, and the third largest in a few years after that. So economy is one part. I think India is getting ready to be a world leader or a world influencer or at least a regional leader in terms of the public goods that it has been creating. Somebody mentioned the vaccines. I think unlike other countries, I think Tejasvi mentioned it, unlike other countries that were trying to maximize profits and control, store, hide their vaccines for their own people, India, while it was fighting the COVID-19, which is a made-in-China disease, had also started giving it to almost 100 countries free of cost. There is no, we weren't extractive in the manner that we engaged with this disease and its cure. So it's a global public good that India made and offered to the world, and lots of countries benefited. Another public good that India is offering is in the world of finance, where UPI and other such, now rupee is going, there are about, I think, 18 countries that are ready to engage in rupee trade with India. This again will be a public good. The digital public infrastructure that has been created and upon which India will now host the next organization, global organization, will be another public good. So the rise of India, even though it is powered by a Rajasic force, is being influenced by a Sattvic influence at a collective level. And I think G20 today and many going forward, for instance, United Nations or the BRICS or in any foreign policy, for instance, we keep talking about multilateralism. How the world is moving from a unilateral world to a bilateral world, and now it's multilateral. What is multilateralism? The fact that India can host successfully a G20 in the face of challenges both from the West as well as from the China and Russia nexus is that multipolarity. India is that multipolar country. India defines multipolarity today. And I think these are concepts that have been part of our existence since ancient times. So I'll stop at that and maybe talk more later.
Thank you, Gautam. I'm going to take a cue from that and ask Devdip to expand on this whole concept that Sri Aurobindo has talked about of India being the Vishwa Guru. At some point, he talks about how India's rise is not going to be selfish. She is not going to rise only for herself, but also for the world. If you can just take that away and give us, throw some light.
So on the Vishwa Guru, I mean, this is an idea which, to really go deeper into, we have to actually go back in time. Because the whole basis of Indian thought and culture stems from Vedanta. And the idea of Vishwa Guru is only meaningful if it is seen as something that not just looks at India as a guru, but also sees the world, the rest of the world, each country and each culture in its own place, fulfilling itself. So much of Sri Aurobindo's engagement with Indian thought and culture stems from that Vedantic perspective, which is focused on this perception of an ultimate reality or truth, infinite, absolute, eternal, manifesting in multiple ways. So one of the keywords or mottos of the G20 was Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And if you actually read the text, it's an extract, it's a phrase which occurs in the Maha Upanishad, one of the minor Upanishads actually, but one which, like all Upanishads, is based on that Vedantic vision. And what the text says is interesting. It talks about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and then it emphasizes again the importance of being stationed in the consciousness of the Brahman. When there is that experience or realization of oneness which can sustain that diversity and that infinity, then there is truly Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Otherwise, it's just a phrase. It's a mental sort of idea which, in practical terms, is very difficult, managing different countries and cultures together. So really, Vishwa Guru, another quotation that comes to me when you talk about Vishwa Guru is from the mother, when she says, "O India, land of light and knowledge, wake up to your true mission in the world, show the way to union and harmony." And again, the idea of union and harmony is possible if we are able to perceive this reality, which is paradoxically one and many at the same time. So without expounding, for too long, I would say, if we wish to really meditate upon what it means for India to be the Vishwa Guru, or even for India to realize its full potential in the future world order, to go even beyond Rajas and Sattva to transcend into another reality really, it would be something that is based on a consciousness that can sustain both oneness and diversity.
I'm going to take the question now to Pariksith ji and ask him to expound a little bit on Sri Aurobindo's, enormous contribution to our philosophy, and how not just indigenous Indic philosophy, how he drew upon ideas and thoughts from across the world to enrich the body of thoughts and light that he brought to us.
Can you hear me? No? Hello. Yeah. Couple of comments I just wanted to add on to Sampadananda ji about Sanatan Dharma. The very talk of destruction of Sanatan Dharma tells you that the person doesn't know what it is, and he or she has taken the most superficial aspects of social behavior or customs to call it Sanatan Dharma. Those who really understand Sanatan Dharma should be willing to let go of what was once a manifestation of it. That Yug Dharma is gone. The Sanatan Dharma's manifestation in this age will be different. And we should all internally, consciously get rid of those bad habits that we have accrued somehow or the other. Without the caste system or the exploitation of people, Sanatan Dharma is alive, and we need to be, each of us, be willing to cleanse ourselves of those habits and those thoughts. So I just wanted to add that. And Gautam knows more about economics than I do, but if you go by PPP, our GDP we are at number 3 already. I think we're at 10 trillion. And I think we should just keep that in perspective, which means If we continue down that path just by PPP, I think we'll be number 2 sooner than 2047. But I'll defer that to you. That's not my bailiwick. So let's talk about the enormous contribution to philosophy, or what we call in our perspective, darshana. Sri Aurobindo's vast vision of things was able to keep everything in perspective. That's one of his greatest contributions to Indian thought. And when I say thought, I mean more than thought, but in English we don't really have a word for darshana. He was able to take the essence of Veda and Vedanta, the true integrality of Vedanta, and bring it back to us. The Karma Yoga of the Gita, which we had somehow forgotten, Sri Krishna's great exhortation, great message to Arjuna to keep fighting till the end with the highest knowledge, with the greatest bhakti. You have to keep working in this world because it is impossible to be without karma. And even Sri Krishna himself is doing karma. That was forgotten somehow, and as Gautam pointed out, we had fallen into tamas. Bringing back that realization that Karma Yoga is a part of a living, dynamic Vedanta. Without it, without acting through the highest awareness and the highest sense of surrender to the divinity within and without, we will become weak, and weakness is not a great quality in Vedanta. And Swami Vivekananda was, if there is one thing we can see with him, tremendous invocation of strength, all kinds of strength, not just the spiritual strength, mental strength, emotional, vital strength, and physical strength. That each of us has to build, but not just personal, it is also collective, it is also together as an organization to be able to work, create an ecosystem. And remember, when the Buddha gave 3 conditions of surrender, one was Sangham. Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. That Sangha is an organization where you surrender to the totality of everyone, surrendered to the Buddha and to the Dharma. What we are missing out is the Sangha, and I'm happy that we are rebuilding that. So, Sri Aurobindo's contribution to philosophy was bringing karma back into philosophy, but also creating such a vast view, Vedantic in essence, but what he called tantric in execution, not rejecting what came to be known as the Vama Marga, the principle of the feminine force, the Shakti, bringing that back and taking it to the highest level and bringing Vedanta and Tantra together and taking it to a concept which he described as truth consciousness or the supermind, or as in Veda, the Rit Chit. So this ability to bring all the visions together, yet giving each its due, even Buddhism, even Western philosophies, from Nietzsche, Übermensch, or what was called the Overman, he took. Even evolution, the concept of evolution, he brought it in the perspective of Vedanta. Now, it's not that evolution did not exist before that. Even in the Veda, we talk about Salilam Apraketam, and in the various suktas, especially the Nasadi and the Purusha Sukta, how the highest consciousness becomes the inconscient, and then from the inconscient rises matter and life and mind, and then even higher levels, the 7 lokas. To be able to bring all that together and yet staying in that highest awareness is his vision. So his biggest contribution, I think, and what he wanted for the youth today was what he called brain power. Our people, our youngsters need to learn how to think. Not just think randomly, discursively, but think in a refined manner, in a subtle manner, and think holistically to be able to see various contradictory views and yet see what harmonizes them and have a holistic view. There's much to be said about it, but I think this should hopefully suffice. Thank you.
I'm going to come back to Sampadananda at this point and ask him about, just like Pariksith was talking about how Sri Aurobindo distilled the knowledge of the Vedas and Upanishads. Can you tell us about Sri Aurobindo's journey with Sanskrit and how, in what way that distillation process happened?
Thank you for asking this question. My favorite topic, Sri Aurobindo and Sanskrit, my lifetime sadhana for this. So, Sri Aurobindo's connection with the Veda, with the language, though with the language it happened much earlier when he came back from London and started staying in Baroda and started learning Indian languages and Sanskrit. But his connection with the Veda, it happened only in Pondicherry when he came to Pondicherry. So the language he learned not from anyone but on his own by going through the content of the Mahabharata, by reading the Naladamayanti episode of the Mahabharata, those 300 odd verses again and again. He entered into the spirit of this language. He not only interpreted the texts, he also composed original writings in Sanskrit. So one of his writings is Bhavani Bharati, one of the most powerful poems where he arouses the Bharata Shakti, which is the very name of Pandilit festival. And it is entirely rooted and centered around this idea of a Bharata Shakti. He also wrote another work called Tantrika Siddhi Prakaranam in Sanskrit. I am talking about Sri Aurobindo's original writings in Sanskrit, and what Pariksith ji was mentioning, that the vision is there of Veda and Vedanta, but the action is of Tantra. Sri Aurobindo's entire integral philosophy, whether it is integral yoga, education, philosophy, is based on this tantric system of yoga, or has a lot of connection with the tantric system of yoga, where the action, no rejection, acceptance, but dynamism, a pure dynamism, which is needed for living a spiritual life. Therefore, a Sanatani who truly lives Sanatana Dharma has to imbibe the qualities of this Sreshta, as I mentioned in the beginning, who believes in Sarva Bhuta Hita, who believes in Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, who believes that Yatra Vishwam Bhavati Eka Nidam, who believes in Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma. And these were the passages from various texts, from the Veda, from the Upanishads, from the Gita, from the Tantric text, which attracted Sri Aurobindo very much towards Sanskrit and the whole tradition therein and the whole philosophical foundation that the rishis have laid. So he dived deep into this tradition and all his interpretation, whether he is composing Savitri, Life Divine, Synthesis of Yoga, or essays on the Gita, or he writing about Dharma, he is writing about the Sanskriti, he is writing about anything connected with India and the Rishi tradition. So it's all rooted in what he grasped from the spirit of this language. That's what I could find out while going through or doing research into Sri Aurobindo's contribution to Sanskrit language and literature. And one of the important aspects that Sri Aurobindo always focused, and Mother also mentioned, that both of them wanted to see Sanskrit as a Rashtra Bhasha, as a national language of India, where India lives this spirit. What Tejasvi mentioned, that we all are sitting here, there is not much difference, like when it comes to the vocabulary. So he could understand by listening to Tamil, being a Kannadiga, so he could understand Tamil, having no contact with Tamil, just by focusing a little bit. So most of the Indian languages, we have got more than 70 to 80% words, Sanskrit words. So Sanskrit plays an important role. And that's what Sri Aurobindo says. And then he says that the roots of all the languages which can be found in, or which are found in Sanskrit, therefore the promotion of Sanskrit can save India. I also make a mention of Vasishta Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni, who once came and then met Sri Aurobindo, met the mother. So he was a part of the whole Congress movement. And in the 1924 Belgaum conference, where it was almost decided that Hindi was going to be the national language of India. So from there, so he made a statement that if Sanskrit is not promoted, India will not, rise. India will not get its rightful position. And that's what Sri Aurobindo wanted, the mother wanted, that by giving a rightful position to Sanskrit, by living this, by giving respectful position to our languages which are rooted in Sanskrit, that India can regain its rightful position. This was what Sri Aurobindo's idea about Sanskrit language, and this is how he was connected, he lived, he promoted, and then one can find like how he entered into the very spirit of language and made it manifest through his writings. And from my personal experience, like being connected with Sanskrit right from my childhood, and then having gone through this whole training of the Veda, Upanishad, Gita and the Tantra, it becomes very easy to understand Sri Aurobindo. At the same time, understanding the Veda, Upanishad, Gita and the Tantra becomes easy because I have an introduction to Sri Aurobindo. So both are complementary to each other, and therefore my message will be that be rooted, and then the principles, the philosophy or the message of Sanatana Dharma becomes clear to everyone else, and that's what India needs today. Dhanyavad.
Taking a cue from that, I'm going to ask Gautam about whether this is something that he feels very deeply about and wants to talk about. He feels that Sri Aurobindo is the seventh Dashna in Indian philosophy, and he wants to take that idea forward. Take it away, Gautam.
It's a new idea, but she's giving me only 3 to 5 minutes. And so maybe I need to do greater justice to it later on. We have 6 darshanas of the Astic school in India. All of you would be knowing this, and 3 in the Nastic schools. Sri Aurobindo, in my opinion, nowhere has it been mentioned yet, but having studied him for some time, I sincerely believe Sri Aurobindo is the 7th darshana in the Vedic traditions, in the Astic tradition. Let me just tell you 3 things which differentiate Sri Aurobindo's work from other systems. First, evolution has not ended. Evolution is going on. So man is a transitional being, and the next evolution will happen in the spiritual domain, what he calls the supramental. And so he's no longer talking about, for instance, attaining nirvana and attaining a dissolution into the Brahman. He's talking about going there and bringing it back. So that is the first. Second, he talks about integral yoga, which is that no yoga can help you if it's all yogas are incomplete in themselves. For instance, the physical yoga, you may have a perfect body, but your mind will be weak. You can have a mental yoga, a Raja yoga, but then if your vital being is left behind, that doesn't work. So there is an integrality of the human being, which has 5 beings within, 5 planes of being within, all of which need to grow, rise and evolve together. The last point where he differentiates from others is the divinization of matter. You don't have to dissolve into the superconsciousness. You have to bring that consciousness back into the very cells of your body, into matter itself. In other words, to divinize matter. These 3 concepts alone, I have not read them in any of the other philosophical schools, for instance, Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, Vaishishya, Yoga, and one more which I'm missing. And Sri Aurobindo articulates them in a very philosophical as well as spiritual manner. And therefore I feel, and if there are any students of philosophy here, I will definitely be following this theme. So I just want to place it before all of you that the Sanatan Dharma is also evolving. So it's not that Sri Aurobindo just took what was earlier and harnessed it into a cohesive literary or a new structure. he took the Indian philosophical traditions, he took Sanatan Dharma one step ahead. And the divinization of matter is that one step. Thank you.
That was very interesting, Gautam. Thank you. I would like to ask Devdip to take forward this whole discussion on evolution and how Sri Aurobindo talked about that, and where do you see that evolution actually happening?
So, really interesting ideas that have been shared by my fellow panelists. This interaction between Vedanta and Tantra is also extremely interesting. In the synthesis of yoga, there is a way in which he places these two traditions. He says in the integral yoga, we follow the aim of the Tantra, but the method of Vedanta. And again, it's a very interesting way of looking at these two systems and how they relate to each other. And also Gautam's extremely interesting idea of, proposing the Seventh Dashna as the integral yoga philosophy. I was reading a book on yoga psychology, which is actually considered to be one of the standard textbooks of yoga psychology. It's written by George Feuerstein, which is quite an interesting text. I haven't completed it, so I can't recommend it wholeheartedly. But what was interesting is that he traces the evolution of these various systems of yoga and philosophical schools as well. And he ends with Purna Yoga. He ends with integral yoga as the logical conclusion or next step in this long tradition. That I found to be very interesting. Purna Yoga, incidentally, the word Purna itself, taken from the invocation to the Isha Upanishad, which I think we can safely say was Sri Aurobindo's favorite Vedantic text. For me, in relation to our discussion on India, Vishwa Guru, and Sanatana Dharma, and Sri Aurobindo, I'm reminded of an episode in the 1950s. In the mid-50s, there was a proposal to have a exhibition on Indian spiritual systems. And the proposal that was put forth to the mother was to trace the development of Indian spirituality from the Vedas to the Upanishads, and then subsequently come to Sri Aurobindo. And her response to that is very interesting. I'll cut a long story short, but basically she says, or let me not paraphrase the mother. I'll tell you what I take from that, and then you can read it yourself. The point that is being made is that on one hand, we can see Sri Aurobindo as the development of the past, but it is also something that belongs to the future. It is not simply something which, I think the point that Gautam also made, it's not simply something that is a collection, an amalgamation, a compilation of past knowledge in a new form that we can access. There is something radically new and unique and absolutely revolutionary. Just as he was a revolutionary in politics, even in his spiritual approach and the integral perspective that he brings forth, it is revolutionary. So it might seem paradoxical to say that he belongs to the future and not to the past, but at the same time, the foundation is very much all this knowledge that we have been talking about. But standing on that rock of knowledge, we look forward. And that to me is really the essence of India's role in the world today, where we are able to, or we hope to, we aspire to be able to synthesize all these different aspects of knowledge and traditions, but also make it relevant in the context of modernity and the Satya Yuga to come.
Parikshit, any concluding comments from you before we open the floor to some questions?
It's always good to conclude at the end, because then they cannot say anything about what I said. But building on what Gautam said that's a brilliant insight. And one must also go back to the uniqueness. Sri Aurobindo never just gave theory. He lived what he prescribed. And so when he talked about the independence of India, he himself went through the process. He was not an outside observer giving theory how to do things. He risked his own life and he went through it. In the process, and he gave a whole program for India's freedom. It was not, okay, we're going to be free and we're going to fight them. He gave a practical, vyavharik system on how India can become free. It was unthinkable that India would become free in the year 1900. Remember, this was Pax Britannica. Britain controlled the whole global trade, almost 50% of it, 25 to 30% of land. And yet, he could say that we will have a program and a multi-layered, multi-dimensional approach. Same thing he brings to evolution or our future. And not only does he talk about, as Gautam has pointed out, the supermind, the synthesis of yoga, transformation of the body, but he gives a whole program. And then he goes through it, and by living it himself, he makes the program easier. He makes it so much easier because he hews the path that he's talking about. And the other practical aspect that you will not find in other systems of Vedanta or other schools is his concept of Gnostic communities, people coming together organically in different parts of the globe and sustaining this transformation individually and together. And so that is a unique part of it. And this is what makes him transcend the previous system and begins a new yuga of darshana. Thank you.
I'd like to invite questions, open the floor to some questions. Any questions? There's a question.
Hello? Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction on Aurobindo's various
We can't
aspects.
hear you. If you can just speak up a little bit.
Thank you so much for this. I had a question to Mr. Pariksith. I'm happy that you mentioned this word darshana because in the Western academics and the history of philosophy, when you talk or do research on Indian philosophy, nowhere in the, this is from my experience, you find this word darshana only when you click on Google Hinduism. Indian philosophy as darshana doesn't exist in the Western terminology. So would you be able to explain the very linguistic aspect of the word philosophy in the Western language and darshana in Sanskrit? Because darshana, if you actually understand the word, it comes from the word perception, of what you perceive. So how could you elaborate a little bit in that aspect?
There was a little static, but what I heard was you wanted us to talk about darshana and the difference between darshana and philosophy. So the word philosophy was first used by Pythagoras. He was a mystic, pre-Socratic mystic. Love of wisdom or love of knowledge, that is what philosophy means. Pythagoras was a mystic. He had made great contributions, but he was also somewhat kind of a cult figure, at least from what we know about him. He tried to create a new life. He was a vegetarian, metempsychosis, which seems a little weird vis-a-vis Indian concept of rebirth. Metempsychosis, the story goes that he got upset when they were beating a dog because he saw someone's grandfather in the dog. Usually in our system, once the soul has evolved to humanity, it does not go back to the dog stage, at least the way Sri Aurobindo and Mother explained. Philosophy usually is thought. You think, you connect, you analyze, you dissect, which has influenced Western science tremendously. You break down things, you take them apart. Take a butterfly, pin it, divide it nicely, take the wings apart, take the antennae, and then say, this is the butterfly. Meanwhile, the butterfly is dead. Darshana, coming from the Sanskrit word dra or root dra, is to see, is to behold. And I've not found an equivalent. Behold is the only way I can give that power to the darshana. That's your seeing the truth. Now, this is not just external seeing, because external seeing is through the senses. This is the seeing where the seer and the seen are not separate. It is seeing oneself. It is sakshatkara, but sakshatkar not of an indirect knowledge where there is a gap between the knower and known. How to explain this? It is an intuitive sense. And the only sense that we have, that we know of, which can give us an idea of what that means, is the sense of being. Each of us has that sense of being. That is not an intellectual concept. If I tell you, Devdip, that you don't exist and I prove it to you, you will still know that there is being. There is a sense, there is an awareness, no matter what I do to prove to you. So it is not dependent on thought, it is an intuitive sense, it is a knowing. And that's what darshan takes us to, which is far beyond the ranges of philosophy.
Out of time, but I can take one very quick question and an equally quick answer to that. Yes.
Thank you. This is not directly connected to Sri Aurobindo, but regarding Samskrita, probably Dr. Sampadananda can answer. Which is the right version of it? Is it Sanskrit or Samskrita? There's always confusion or a debate over it. Is it like India and Bharat or something? Which is the actual thing, Samskrita or Sanskrit? Which is the right way of calling Samskrita?
Sampadananda, very quickly.
So very quickly, Sanskrit or Sanskrit, both are correct. Grammatically, both are correct.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you, panelists.